Good evening. Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome to Washington National Cathedral. My name's Randy Hollerith. I am blessed to be the dean of this cathedral, and it is always an honor and a pleasure to host these events. So thank you for coming to be with us, and a special welcome to all of you around the country who are joining us online as well. We're so glad that you're a part of this program this evening as well. This program is part of the Cathedral's ongoing programming called A Better Way, Religious Values for Civic Life. We're looking for better ways for us to be together as Americans, better ways for us to disagree, better ways for us to find common cause. At the same time, we're lifting up that our Judeo-Christian values are essential to our democracy, and that we need to learn how to treat one another with dignity and respect. And so all of the programming that comes out of this cathedral these days is focused on these issues. And we're very pleased tonight to have two very special guests. They need no introduction, but I'm going to do one anyway. The Senator Cory Booker is the senior senator from New Jersey and a man of deep faith who is passionate about justice and compassion, among many other things. And John Meacham, the prize-winning historian, is, we're most proud to say, the canon historian of this cathedral and a great friend to this institution. To have these two men here in conversation is a great blessing, and will you join me in welcoming them both? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So thank you for being here. I want to get a bit of a personal grievance off my chest first, if that's all right. I don't know if you all noticed or heard about it, but Cory just finished his filibuster speech a few minutes ago. But yeah. But I was really on the day, and 25 hours and 5 minutes, so over the course of the day that this unfolded, I got a text several texts from friends who said, "This is amazing. Senator Booker just mentioned you and quoted you." And I was thinking, well, yeah, I would think in 25 hours you could find something. And then I looked it up. And I just have a question, Senator.
I'm afraid.
What does a guy have to do to get somewhere before 21 hours, 48 minutes, and 32 seconds? Doris got mentioned at 11 hours, and that really irritated me.
I want you to know that, first of all, it's an honor to be in this sacred space with a man that I have always respected from afar, but one of the blessings I've had in my career over recent years is to become friends with somebody that has been a source for me of spirit, not just history and facts. One of my favorite moments of my time in Washington was when I was in the Oval Office with President Biden, Kamala Harris, and a number of the leading African-American leaders of Congress. And I leaned in and told the president that more than half of the elected black senators in the history of the country are here. Wow. And he gets up afterwards and he's ushering us out of the Oval Office for perhaps his next meeting with the schedule he kept. But then as we get toward the door, he puts his arm around me and he goes, "Cory!" And I go, "Yes, Mr. President." He goes, "I'm working on my State of the Union speech next week." I go, I know you've got that speech, sir. He goes, "Well, I might need some help on it. I'm going to Camp David. Would you help me out?" And I'm like, sure, yeah, right. I said, of course, miss, I'm at your service. And the weekend goes past, he doesn't call me. The day of the big speech, an hour beforehand, we have votes in the Senate. We go vote.
Underscore, an hour before.
An hour before.
That's an important detail.
And I then come out. I love to not go through the tunnels. I love to walk outside. And I walk down the steps of the Capitol. I feel like I'm Bill on Capitol Hill. And cue the music. And the Supreme Court's right in front of me, the Capitol Dome over my right shoulder, the hall, it's just a majestic, and I take a moment to pause and my cell phone rings. I pull out my cell phone and I answer it, and it begins with what I think, forgive me if this sounds disrespectful, what I think is one of the stupidest questions in America. I answer the phone and the person says, hello, this is the White House operator. Will you hold for the President of the United States? And I go, yes, I will. And the next thing I hear is, Cory! And I'm like, yes, Mr. President. He goes, I'm working on my speech. Which at that point absolved me from years of procrastination in college where I waited the last minute.
Yeah.
And the President of the United States asked me if I could help him with an area I have a lot of policy depth, and he literally read the speech to me, this section of the speech, and then he asks me, what I perhaps people with spouses or significant others here have heard many times, he says, what do you think? And at that moment, you have to decide, do you tell your loved one what they want to hear, or do you tell them the truth? And I decided the President of the United States of America has called me and asked for my opinion, I will give it. And I had little tinkers here and there, and then we hang up the phone, and I'm just could not believe this experience, and go back to my office, come back, line up, you go across the Capitol, senators walk southward toward the southern lower chamber, I'm joking, and we get in, and you sit down, and it's a aerobic exercise because you're doing a lot of squats during these speeches. So I've rested up, I'm limber, ready for and the person comes in and says, to this day, I don't care who the president is, what party they're from, when I hear that person walk into that chamber and say, the President of the United States of America, and the whole chamber erupts in applause. Joe Biden, I think, has the record for the longest it takes to get from that door to the podium.
He's actually still there.
Yes. He shakes everybody's hands. I still remember Marjorie Taylor Greene came up. He greeted her like she was a sister, and he gets to the podium and he begins his speech, and we're up and down, and then the section of the speech, and I hear my words, my critique, my input, I should say, and of course I'm the first person standing up in that section. And it was this fantastic, and I'm yelling at everybody, stand up, I don't care, Ted Cruz, stand up for this one. And it was just this moment I could not believe that my ancestors could have never imagined. I go home and I'm lying in bed, still a buzz about the whole experience, and my cell phone lights up. Don't keep your cell phone on the nightstand, it's a bad habit, and I look at it and it's a 917 number that I don't recognize. And then I open it up, and the man that I did not have a personal relationship with, it says, Senator Booker, John Meacham here. Thank you for helping the President of the United States with his speech. You made more of a difference than you know. And I will tell you, when you have a man of his esteem text message you, he immediately made the mistake because I now had his cell phone number.
Yeah, that didn't think that.
And I was one step short of a temporary restraining order until I convinced him to come to my office to sit with me, and that began what I consider a valuable friendship to guiding me as a United States Senator.
I'm honored by that. No, I hadn't thought out all the implications of sending the text. So, in the split screen of this story, the clergy in the room will appreciate this. When you are, say, 57 minutes away from the most significant sermon you've ever given, and you have people that might be helping you with that, and you decide, this is a good moment to revisit health care, and you call a United States senator, not known for their brevity, the car is outside. You know, and President Biden, you know, never did things early, right? I mean, I think that's a fair thing to say. And so he says, I was actually on Zoom for this, and he says, you know what, I want to hear what Booker has to say. And I won't say we groaned, but we did. And what I appreciate more than anything else was the pithiness with which you offered your edits to our former president. And you and President Biden share something, which is an appreciation of what we often talk about as America's civil religion. We're in a cathedral that is in a fascinating in-between space, in culturally, not religiously or theologically, but culturally. A cathedral sitting on a hill overlooking a secular capital, an emblem of the eternal amid the temporal powers and principalities of the world. What do you think the soul of the country is? And give us an assessment of how you think we're doing. And I'll see y'all in about 20 minutes.
There is a chaplain named Samuel Colt from Passaic, New Jersey, who said something that I think cuts to the heart of the matter during the Civil War. He was being interviewed, and he asked the question that I think about a lot now. He said, "Are we a nation or have we a government?" I believe we are a nation, that we have shared values, common cause, and that we have a legacy, a lineage that connects us in every generation to chords that, to me, are still resonant bonds that should hold us together. Colt said this during the Civil War when we were being torn asunder, and he believed that more than the government of the United States, the buildings we see, the Constitution itself, but there's something deeper below that. And that's what I have, in many ways, dedicated myself to. I think we have a shared civic gospel that does stem from these imperfect geniuses that put our country forward. They broke with the course of human events and tried to found a nation in the best ideals of humanity. They literally debated the ideas of the Enlightenment, drew in the great philosophers, and tried to come up with a government that reflected this national, what they hoped to be a national yearning. Now, I like to think it starts first and foremost with the words of the Declaration of Independence. We're not founding this nation on a theology. We're not founding this nation on a divine right of kings and queens. In fact, we're rejecting that. We're founding this on the ideas that there is this greater wisdom and connectivity that comes from people. And the last words of the Declaration of Independence are a tribute to the highest of all values in humanity, I believe, and that is love. Because in the last word of the Declaration of Independence, they say if this nation is to make it, we must mutually pledge to each other our lives and our fortunes and our sacred honor. And so I will always put my faith in and my work towards trying to foster that sense of not just connection, but commitment to one another. That we are not, as much as we are a free market capitalist system, we're not some society that's going to become great because each one of us pursues our individual greed or yearnings or aspirations for material benefit. No, our country was founded on something deeper than that. And Adam Smith himself was a moral philosopher. And so I believe, if you ask me where we stand right now, is I think, as you and I have discussed before, that we are at yet another generational reckoning with that question, are we a nation or do we have a government? And what I am hoping for, because my faith tradition tells me that it's often in moments like this, weeping may endure through the night, if America hasn't broken your heart, you don't love her enough. This is a dark time in our country of deep divisions like that time in the Civil War. But I am a big believer. I have unyielding faith that joy will come in the morning, and that this in many ways is the moment that is actually setting us up to rekindle, to renew, to redeem that idea that we are a nation that shares a common civic gospel.
Talk, if you would, about how did we get here? How did we come to this particular hour? One way of thinking about the last 10 years of American history is it has been dominated by a single figure. The country made one decision, then made a different decision, and then made yet another in that decade. But putting on your, not just your philosophical hat, but your sociologist hat, how did this moment come? How did we get to a place where you felt compelled to knock Strom Thurmond off that list?
Well, I would first say that I don't want to make any one individual the main character of the story as much as the particular individual we're talking about wants to be the main character in the story. I think that he is in many ways a symptom of the hurt, a symptom of the wounds that are within our nation right now. And I think that if you were asking me to put on my sociological hat, I think that to reduce it to one cause is wrong. There are many forces going through our society that have created deep changes from my father's generation, who grew up in that era of those people born around 1940, rode a wave of this country in many ways at its best. Despite our problems, you had a lot of good signs. 90% of people in that generation did better than their parents. You had the black-white wealth divide closing as we saw major milestones that changed segregation by law into ideals of unity, equality, and justice. My father was born to a single mother in poverty. I now have, thanks to Henry Louis Gates, been able to trace his history back into slavery and see how poverty, generational trauma really came down to him, and yet he was part of an America that had the biggest expansion of middle class humanity had seen ever. This is before China's big expansion, India's big expansion. That generation rode a wave, and there was a boldness pointing to the moon, not as a dream, but as a destiny. There was a boldness that when the horrors of hate spread in Europe and beyond, that we could rise and join together in a community of nations to reject that and preserve liberty. There was a boldness in that generation that then came my generation. If you were born a little after my generation, if I'm an X-gener, if you were born a millennial, something happened from my generation to the millennials where by the time the 80s came, only 50% did better. And there was a lot of other forces technologically that were coming. These devices that I had on my nightstand are doing very, I think, damaging things to our society. As much as they give a counterfeit sense of connectivity, they've often driven us apart. 25 years ago, Bowling Alone was written about the destruction of community. Well, it's only gotten worse now. The things that ground us to the very ideals of happiness, things like faith, things like community, things like meaning in your jobs. My father had worked for IBM, and their corporate ethos was very different than the corporate ethos now. In fact, I asked a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, I was telling him that the corporate culture is very different than my dad's corporate culture. I said, now they asked CFOs, have they ever made a decision that was against the long-term strength and endurance of their company in order to juice their quarterly reports? And the study said that 85% said yes, and this corporate CEO looked at me and says, well, 15% of them lied then. So there's a lot of these forces, I think, that have come together to give people a growing sense of discontent, a growing sense of worry and stress, a growing sense of dislocation or lack of connection. There are forces in our politics right now that are not left-right forces, but citizens united, unleashed an ungodly amount of capital into our systems that are, I think, perverting and corrupting our politics as we know it, and there's a number of other things. So this is just a little bit of the swirl that I think is going around right now that has created this sense of such disaffection from our politics that in this last election, the United States of America rejected both candidates. One got 49.7%, one got 49.3%. The majority of Americans voted against both of them. And so the question is, we need to, as a society, begin to look at these forces. But I think, as you've taught me actually, the part of the story I didn't share with you is one that he came to my office after calling the police that I was trolling him too much, but
The courts were not helpful.
and you told me this beautiful, when I told you about the challenges of our nation, you gave me this tour de force, I wish I recorded it, of American history, of how many times we came to brinks, came to crossroads, how many times demagogues from Father Conklin with his anti-Semitic screeds to all the way to McCarthyism. Every generation has had their demagogue, their fear mongers, people preying upon people's fears and frailties in order to exploit it for their own political gain. You told me these great stories about U.S. respected generals calling for military takeover in the 30s, or Huey Long, you mentioned, saying that the people are going to storm the Capitol and I'll be with it. You showed me that history may not repeat itself, but it definitely rhymes. And you said to me something really beautiful that I want to reiterate now in this point. You said that every single generation has faced moments like this. This is not an unprecedented time. But what was interesting to me about your answer and what spoke to me and my heart was that your solution in this moment wasn't, let's elect the right person. You turned more to the people, and that every time you said that the better angels, what I would call Americans choosing that common civic gospel, that we will be a nation of love and unity and not that nation of division and darkness. This is one of those moments, and I think that it is in the very moments that you are feeling a sense of loss that can lead you to find truly what's missing. And I think it is a politics of meaning, not electoral politics, but more from the origins of that word, is that we can find again meaning and connection. And I think that's our only hope right now, is to have not leader, but more leaders that stand up to speak to that gospel that I hope can ultimately help us to redeem the dream of America that many people are starting to become cynical about.
Yeah. I think the one point is, just because things have worked out in the past doesn't mean they will again. But it does mean that the forces we're contending with are elemental, right? I mean, we've been doing this since the 3rd chapter of Genesis, right? There was a piece of fruit, we were told not to take it, we took it because we wanted it. And, cue the rest, right? I think we are in, and I use the word quite advisedly, it's interesting that so much of our vernacular of politics comes from the ancient understanding of healthcare. Crisis is from Hippocrates. It's the moment in the course of a disease where a patient lives or dies. The body politic, corruption initially meant not graft, but disease. And the ancients understood that our common life, to your point, was as important as our own individual lives. That there was, in fact, not only a linguistic connection, but a genuine connection. We're in a moral crisis because we have to decide how we're going to be with each other. And the only thing I can think of, or at least part of the solution, is to tell a different story, to tell the story you're talking about. And this is where I don't have to face voters, so I can say this. We just have to get 51% to do the right thing, right? I mean, it's just barely, right? That we don't need, and that's a landslide if you're talking about human behavior, right? Right, Bishop? Yeah. They wouldn't have work if everybody was good, you know. And yeah, that's funny. I'll wait. But it's about you know, the origin of the word sin is to miss the mark. And I just think what I worry about is that not enough of us are aiming enough at the mark and want to do this. So one of the questions I have is, you are an active politician. You represent a great and noble state where the initial...
Be careful now, be careful.
Well, you know, I live in Tennessee, so when I say I have conservative friends, that's redundant. But a state where the revolution unfolded, you are responsive. You work for the people of New Jersey and also the people of the United States because of the nature of the Constitution. When you look in their eyes, do you see the longing you're talking about becoming a nation and not simply a group with a government?
Yeah, look,
and what gives you hope about, can we get 51% of them to hear the story you're talking about?
So one of the best experience, I have a friend that's a conservative Republican pollster named Frank Luntz, and he came to me recently and said to me, you ran for president 3-4 years too early. And I go, what do you mean? And he goes, what I'm seeing in my polls now is people don't want more of the same fighting. They really want people that can unify in our country and bring people together. And I'll give you an example of what I thought was going to be a long night in Iowa. I was running for a town hall stage, and I was excited. We were in a not that populated town, but we had a packed high school gymnasium, and I was running, and when I get ahead of steam, when I played football for Stanford, I could stop on a dime. Now, don't get in front of me. It takes me a lot longer to decelerate. But this big guy who looked like a former linebacker for Iowa State steps in front of me with all kind of enthusiasm and goes, dude, I want you to punch Donald Trump in the face. And I look up at him, I go, sir, that's a felony, sir. That's a felony. And I look at him and I say, can I tease you from the stage? And he goes, sure, dude. And I jump up on the stage and I repeat his line. I go, this guy here told me that I should punch Donald Trump in the face. And the whole crowd went crazy. And I said, well, that's how we lose. I said, we didn't beat Bull Connor by bringing bigger dogs and bigger fire hoses. And the thing about where we are in this country is if we're doubling down on the darkness, then I think it turns all of us off from our politics. Yep. And what's needed now, the genius of the activists in the civil rights movement, this rainbow coalition of people, is they didn't sacrifice their dignity even though we're fighting moral urgencies every day. What they did was bring a creativity that called to the conscience of our country. What they did was spark the moral imagination of our nation. And so I hear this all the time, in almost a debate. I just finished a book, which I'm hoping you'll blurb for me, man. But really, in all seriousness, it's a tribute to, I think, 10 of the more important American virtues, which are really human virtues, that are not nice things to have. It's how you win. And I agree with you about you only need 51%. I have seen it right now in the Senate, how we're 3 or 4 votes shy from saving us from being a nation that gives tax cuts to billionaires and cuts SNAP and Medicaid. I see that we're a few votes shy we were actually 1 vote shy of massively expanding permanently the child tax credit that Joe Biden doesn't get enough credit for, that cut child poverty in our country in half, that showed for once that the moral obscenity of child poverty is not an inevitability, it's a policy choice. So I hear you on saying we only need 51%. But at the end of the day, what we need to do in this country now is not just win an election for whatever that 4-year period or that 8-year period. We need a strategy to find a way to rekindle that sense of common cause, where it's a movement election again, like many of us have seen during our lives, where there is a mandate to do the things that reflect our common spirit. I remember when I went to go endorse Joe Biden, talk to him about the fact that we have this weird politics that's so broken, it belies the fact that most of us, even on the most controversial issues, 70 to 75% of us agree on most of the basic things. And yet we do not have a politics that can translate that into the kind of policies. And so the last thing I'll say to this point is, I am yearning for, in the remainder of my life, the short period that I have, is for us to reignite that sense that we can do big, bold things together and have the kind of government and politics that enables that. And that will not happen unless we have leaders, plural, that can begin to spark that type of moral imagination that can overcome the cynicism of our time.
So how do we incentivize that? And when I say 51%, I probably shouldn't use the number, because what I just mean is we just enough of us have got to get it right? And believe, not agree on policy, but accept that we are in fact engaged in the journey toward a more perfect union, to bring that document you alluded to bring the words of the Declaration closer to reality. I think every generation can judge itself, I would argue, in American history by the degree to which it has lived into the implications of the sentence that we're all created equal, or the degree to which we have fallen short of that. And as we begin, just parenthetically, as we begin this 250th anniversary year next year of the Declaration, absolutely, it would be against my business model not to tell you to be very excited about 250 years. But remember, we have not been a fully multiracial democracy except since 1965. So the Declaration is 250 years old. American democracy, as we understand it, is 60 years old. And so it's very young, actually. And what I'm curious about is, and maybe I'm being too cynical, but politicians, all people, are, as Lincoln said, products of the incentives in their world. And how do we get the more sensible, the supra-partisan? Because I think more people, I don't like we're saying bipartisan, because that suggests moral equivalence, but there are certain things that should be supra-partisan, above the ordinary struggles. How do you incentivize your colleagues? Because you mentioned the cell phones. I remember a moment, remember that old feature in Esquire many years ago, Signs of the Apocalypse, various things. One sign of the apocalypse for me was one of your former colleagues. I said, how did things get so divided? And he pulled out his cell phone and showed me his Twitter mentions. And he said, this is it. Because if I do something that's against the base, I immediately hear about it. From the base. I don't hear about it from the amorphous national interest. So how do those of us who believe, and we may be wrong, that we're in favor of a supra-partisan national interest, how do we make that clearer to the people who wield the elective power?
Well, there's two things I would say real quick. One on leaders like me, and then one on all of you. And look, the one on leaders like me, and I've had this conversation with my Democratic caucus, is like you said, we need to tell a different story, and we need to find more creative ways of doing it. In the last election, I watched how Democrats got shellacked because they weren't even showing up on a lot of the platforms where people are. Most Americans now get their news from their handheld devices. And I went to Chuck Schumer and I said, this is a very bad situation. We need to find a way. I mean, I think for podcast downloads, like for every dozen that Donald Trump had, Senator Harris or Vice President Harris only had one. We didn't even show up where young people were, Discord and the gaming platforms, and I can go through that. And so a lot of this is tactical before I get to the larger strategic thing of trying to show up. When I was one of the early politicians in America that moved onto these social media platforms. As much as I think we should ban them for kids, period. I think they're like cigarette smoking. I'd like to see a lot more policy controlling them. I think that's true, but I am not going to, I'm one of the, at the time, especially one of the few senators on TikTok. Because I learned when I was in Newark as the mayor during the Great Recession that I had to find a way to break through the noise of a nation that stereotyped inner cities, demeaned and degraded them or ignored them completely, and it didn't see what I saw, which is the city of abundance and possibility and promise. And so I knew I had to find a way to break through this media noise where people weren't paying attention. And I found a wonderful moment one night when I was sitting at home with my two best friends, Ben and Jerry, and
It's funny. My roommate in college was a guy named Jack Daniels. Maybe they know each other.
They might know each other. And I was watching The Tonight Show that I'd watched since on my grandfather's lap, watching Johnny Carson. And this Tonight Show host, a man named Conan O'Brien, comes on and says, I hear Newark, New Jersey has a new healthcare program. And I was really excited because we had done something to lower prescription drug prices for people in my city at participating pharmacies. But then he continued the joke. But I think the best healthcare program for the city of Newark is a bus ticket out of town. And I was like, oh. And I reached for my chubby hubby for comfort. But I realized, wait a minute, there's this new thing called Twitter. It was 2009. Ashton Kutcher and CNN just had their race to 1 million followers. So I went to City Hall and I recorded my own video where I said, I am the mayor of the city. Conan O'Brien has insulted our city. I bragged about our city. And I said, Conan, by the power vested in me by the people of the city of Newark, I hereby ban you from Newark Airport. You're on the no-fly list. Try JFK, buddy. And put the video out. And it went so viral, satellite trucks started lining up in front of my house. I got First Amendment absolutists calling me up saying, how could I violate Conan O'Brien's First Amendment rights? And I just went around. Suddenly, I was being invited on daytime talk shows and Larry King, and it got to be such a big story in America that the TSA felt, this is true, felt obliged to clarify on their website that mayors in America can't put people on no-fly lists. And then Conan O'Brien on The Tonight Show plays my video and responds angrily and says, by the power vested in me by the studio audience, I hereby ban Cory Booker from Burbank Airport, which I was like, who cares?
Yeah.
I go to LAX. I then banned him from the entire state of New Jersey. I would have banned him from listening to Bruce and Bon Jovi, our patron saints, but that would have been cruel and unusual punishment. It became the #1 trending story in America, our faux fight, until the one person on the planet Earth who was most in charge of healing rifts in war-torn countries, the Secretary of State for the United States of America, a woman named Hillary Clinton, filmed her own video where she said, in essence, Cory, Conan, give peace a chance. And next thing you know, I am standing behind the curtain I've watched all of my life. The mayor of a mid-sized American city that in years past, if they were upset about a joke, they could have written a letter, it would have been read by an intern's intern and thrown in the circular filing cabinet. Now I'm standing behind the Tonight Show curtain, it pulls back, I'm introduced, I walk onto the floodlight, sit next to Conan O'Brien, who apologizes to the people of the city of Newark and gives us $100,000 in charity. And I will tell you, I suddenly got callbacks from national foundations. I suddenly got developers from outside of my city to build our first hotel in 40 years, and so on and so forth. Communications, how you communicate, how you tell your story, how you break through in a competitive environment. The 25 hours on the floor was a strategic decision to break through the noise at a time that we needed to. TikTok alerted us on their platform, they'd never seen anything like it. It got 340 million likes. And so tactically from my standpoint, before I get to your all responsibility, but from my standpoint, it is trying to find a way to tell not my story, but our story again, in the ways that the leaders I revere, people whose heights I will never achieve, but people like Martin Luther King stood before the nation and did not read a list of grievances. He didn't unveil a 5-point policy plan. He tapped into a deep chord that resonates with all of us. He redeemed the dream and got us all to see that nation again. That's to me the leaders, and I know many of them, that leave me in a sense of awe, reverence, but more importantly, inspire me to act. But your part is just as urgent, because you have a whole world of people that are trying to tell you that you don't have power to change the course of your country. And I'll give you one example of how what you do matters more than you'll ever imagine, and it comes to a date that you will know, and all the other nerds out there of history
And
will
let's
know.
be clear, if they're here, they're nerds.
Yes. March 7th, 1965. My friend, you wrote a book about this moment.
Walking over the Alabama River on a bridge named for a
There
grand
is-
dragon of the KKK.
A United States Senator, too.
Yep.
There is a white guy on a couch in New Jersey watching his TV on March 7th, 1965. And if you do have a young person next to you, hold them, because they may not know this history, but there was a time in America where we only had 3 channels. People were a lot better shaped back then because you had to get up to change them. And the birth rate was a lot higher back then because TV was done at 11 o'clock and you had to find something else to do. Guy on the couch watching TV, the movie that night. Do you know what the movie that night was?
I do, but you're on a roll.
Okay, the movie that night was the network premiere of Judgment at Nuremberg. And they broke away from it, from the horrors and the hate of the Holocaust, to see the horrors and the hate on this bridge over that river where John Lewis and those marchers got stopped by Alabama state troopers, tear gas, horses, billy clubs, Bloody Sunday. Now, what does one American do while he's watching? Well, his first instinct is, I got to go to Alabama. And then he slumps back down on his couch. He just started his law firm. He was out. He couldn't even afford a plane ticket, not to mention to close his business for a week or so. And then he does something so powerful. He says, I am not going to let my inability to do everything to undermine my determination to do something in the cause of my country in a moral moment. And what does he do? He says, I'm going to do the best I can with what I have where I am. And he does a calculation. And he finds that himself that he could afford 1 more hour pro bono work. He was already doing some, but 1 more hour, and he would be dedicated to the cause of civil rights in America. And since he was in New Jersey, he just called around, are there any civil rights organizations in New Jersey? And he finds this organization led by a young woman named Lee Porter, who died this year at 98, while she still had the same job she had back then in 1965, which was the head of the Northern New Jersey Fair Housing Council. And the woman, Lee Porter's like, I need help. Thank you, Jesus, thank you. And he's like, okay, I'm here to help you. And the two of them design a sting operation that they would send. New Jersey is one of the top most segregated states at that point. They would send black families into white neighborhoods to see if they could buy houses, and they would be turned away, and then they would send a volunteer white couple behind them to see if the house was really sold or off the market like they were told. And they began over the years exposing all of this housing discrimination, getting it in stories. Years pass, it's now 1969, and this lawyer gets this case file from a family moving up from the South, looking for a home. They'd been turned away over and over again in the nicer suburbs with great public schools, and they go to work. They send the black couple out to a new home. They fall in love with the home, but they're told it was sold. The white couple comes after them, finds out the house is still for sale, puts a bid on the house under instructions from the black couple. The bid is accepted, papers are drawn up, and on the day of the closing at the real estate agent's office, the white couple does not show off. Black man, lawyer Marty Friedman. They walk into a real estate agent's office. Sounds like a good joke. A black man and a Jew walk into a real estate agent's office.
There's one parachute.
Yes. Immediately, the real estate agent recognizes the black man, sees he's caught. The lawyer starts to go into a speech about the violation of New Jersey fair housing law. It's now against the federal law, 1968 fair housing law, but he doesn't get that far into his speech because the real estate agent stands up and punches Marty Friedman in the face, sigs his dog on the black man, and the two have to fight their way out. And then they start writing letters. The owners of the home, horrified, find out what's going on, agree to sell the home to the black family. Mother, father, 2-year-old, and a 4-month-old. 43 years later, the baby goes on to be America's only 4th black person ever elected to the United States Senate, me. I am here, and everything that I'm doing, because one American didn't just sit on the couch and treat our democracy like a spectator sport. They got up and said, what is my sacred offering to this moral moment? We all have that power right now by what we choose to do in this moral moment when so many of our neighbors are hurting, so many of our neighbors are afraid, so many of our neighbors are staring at a document on their desk or a computer screen and seeing that their health care is going to be so much that they have to make the terrible choice of who in their family will go without health care so that our children can keep it. This is a moral moment, and it demands more of us to say, this is not the democracy that I want. There is a corruption, there is cancer, there is hurt, and there's harm, but the only way to get rid of it is what you told me in that first meeting, is that for more and more of us to stand up, and for every one of us that stands up, even though our legs shake and our voice breaks, every single one of us stands up, we will ignite another to do the same, and before you know it, we have a greater and greater movement for change.
Do you I don't want this going to your head. What gives you hope?
Look, I'm a kid from the suburbs, those wealthy suburbs that those lawyers helped my family move into. And my dad used to look at me as a kid and say, boy, don't you dare walk around this house like you hit a triple. You were born on third base. And my dad, every time he would tell the story, the dog in that story would get bigger. Eventually he had to fight a pack of wolves to get us in that house. And my father watched all-American football player, scholarship to Stanford, graduate school, overseas, coming back to Yale Law School, but he never was satisfied. He said to me, I'm graduating from Yale. He's like, boy, you got more degrees in the month of July, but you ain't hot. Life ain't the degrees you get, it's the service you give. And the best thing I ever did, following a dream I had, my mom asked me when I didn't know what to do, she goes, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? And I decided to write a list of my heroes in America down because I was going to model myself after one of them. Brian Stevenson was on that list. Myron Wright Edelman was on that list. But the guy I eventually decided to pattern my life over after, and this is the old saying, the best way to make God laugh is to make plans for yourself, because not long later I would turn into a politician, but was a guy named Jeffrey Canada, who moved into the most dangerous neighborhood he can find in Harlem and started this extraordinary nonprofit that transformed blocks in Harlem, charter schools and healthcare. It was unbelievable what Jeffrey did. He was one of Clinton's People of Hope and MacArthur Genius Grant. So I picked a neighborhood that people perceived as extraordinarily dangerous in the Central Ward of Newark. I live about 100 or so yards, still from there now. The only senator that lives in a black and brown neighborhood that I still think, even though it's improved so much, is still below the poverty line. And when I was there, I was stunned by what I saw. Open-air drug dealing. I was living next to a crack house. First time I ever saw people huddling in the back and doing intravenous drug use. And at that point, I met my greatest life professor. I got my BA from Stanford, but my PhD on the streets of Newark, a woman named Miss Virginia Jones, tenant president, about 5 feet tall, elderly woman. And I went to her. I was coming out of my last year of law school, and I knocked on the door as if I was some hero from a John Wayne movie, and I go, "Ma'am, little Philly, I'm here to help you." And she looks at me like I need all the help in the world, and she was right. And I told her and everything, and she did this experiment where she walked me down to Martin Luther King Boulevard in the middle of the street, and she says to me, "If you want to help me, tell me what you see in this neighborhood." And I go, "What do you mean?" She goes, "Describe my neighborhood." And I described it just as dark as I described it a few minutes ago. Drug dealing, projects, crack house. And the more I talked, the more angry she looked at me. And then she walks away, saying to me in a huff, "You can't help me." And so I run after her, I grab her from behind very respectfully, and I go, "I don't understand." And she goes, "Boy, you need to understand something. The world you see outside of you is a reflection of what you have inside of you. If you're one of these people who looks at my neighborhood and all you see is problems, darkness, and despair, that's all there's ever going to be. But if you're one of those stubborn people who every time you open your eyes, you see hope, you see possibility, you see love, you see the face of God," she goes, "then you can help me." And she leaves me there looking at my feet, thinking to myself, "Okay, grasshopper, thus endeth the lesson." I would go on to sit at her feet, watch lines of people from the projects. Brick Towers was I would eventually move in, would just wait and to see her, and she would solve people's problems. She taught me about politics. She knew the city council person. She knew she could deliver these blocks of votes. She got things done. She helped people. She battled with people. She was amazing. But when I would eventually move into the buildings to live on the top floor of these decaying projects, someone told me that her son was murdered in the lobby. A veteran came home and somebody shot and killed him in the lobby, pulled her down to see her son bleeding into the lobby floor. And it was the 80s. This was long past that, but I asked her, why would she still live here? I knew where she worked. I knew that she could live other places. And she looked at me and she said, "Riley," she said, "Why am I still here?" I go, "Yes." She goes, "Why am I still in apartment 5A?" I go, "Yes." She goes, "Why am I still the tenant president of these buildings since the day they were built in 1969? I go, "Yes, ma'am." And she goes, "Because I am in charge of Homeland Security." She didn't wait for a presidential appointment, for a cabinet position, a title. That was the kind of love she had. And so when you ask me about hope, I'm telling you, I learned hope from Miss Virginia Jones. That real hope immediately makes you vulnerable. That real hope has scars. It has wounds. It's been fractured over and over, but yet every single day it stands up and hopes again. Real hope is the active conviction that despair will never have the last word. Right now, if America hasn't broken your heart, you don't love her enough. But for any of us to not answer the despair we feel with hope is surrender. Hope is our defiance. Hope is our shield. Hope is the only way to be. We have to be an agent of hope. And if anything, hope can always be found working.
Thank you. A couple of questions. Thank you, ma'am. So questions from you all. The current administration has tested the limits of the executive branch and will likely continue to do so for the next 3 years, continuing to threaten our separation of powers. So what do you think politics post-2029 looks like? What reforms can be made and what comes next? And you mentioned something about Luntz saying you ran for president too early. You know, you can fix that.
Run for president too late?
No, you know. I mean, I'm not much of a mathematician, but you know, you could do this again.
Right. So I love studying faiths. I really do. I think.
Wasn't that deft? I love.
I love studying faiths and the Hindu faith. One of the most vaunted gods of the Hindu faith is Shiva, the god of destruction. Because without destruction, you can't have renewal and rebirth. And that's why Shiva's so favored. And so we are in a time of destruction right now. And I think many people are learning about constitutional principles in the way they never had to think about before. I mean, my friends now know what the emolument clause is, or posse comitatus, or all of these things that are things that, as a graduate from law school, I've had to go back and read and reread and study. So I think a lot more of us are aware of how fragile our Constitution is. We're aware of constitutional failings. And I think this is going to create, it's painful when I say to myself, we're not even done with the first of his 4 years. But I think that as much as we will have opportunities, New Jersey has an opportunity to reject the politics that Donald Trump represents. The midterms are not that far away. I think that we will start to push back on this. But I really hope that the 28 election represents a moment of renewal and reinvention of who we are. And some of the things I urgently want to see as changes to our laws that govern the system change. It is absolutely outrageous to me, and this is me thinking this is a problem on both sides of the aisle, how much corruption we tolerate in Washington. We have grown so accustomed to senators and congresspeople trading stocks with corporations. We've grown so accustomed to PACs, corporate PACs coming in, dumping ungodly amounts of money on people. I could go through all the things that I'm hoping people see that, wait a minute, my energy costs are high because of corporate oil companies that are able to manipulate our system. My grocery bills are so high because mergers were allowed after politicians got contributions. I'm hoping this sets it up so a group of leaders who are going to compete on both sides, the last baby boomer president, the last baby boomer leader of the Senate, that generation, that great generation is starting to leave the stage. A new generation, X's, millennials, have to now reimagine our politics, and I'm hoping this gives more fuel to the fire of whoever those next leaders are. This is one of those moments, I think, where America could go through a deep moment of renewal to make our democracy stronger.
Are you, let me back into this. What did you learn from your race in 2020?
A lot of things. One of the chapters in my book is all about vulnerability, and I'm trying to stop myself from being too vulnerable here. Look, I think it's, for me, there was a lot of experience I had in my own communications I ran a lot from the heart, and I want to do that still. I will unapologetically always center myself in my faith tradition and my the love that I feel that this country, that we need to have for one another. And I know there's a big appetite within my party that let's just beat the other person down, and I'm fine to compete should I, when I run for re-election next year, and should I ever run again for president. But I think the thing that I really want to do is be a lot more forward with, I think, some of these very tangible policy ideas. Ezra Klein, who's a guy I've known for years, I knew his grandfather, had me on his podcast days before I dropped out of the election and just said, the spirit of your campaign is very appealing to me, but I want to hear the policy planks that really support that. What does a politics of community, what does a politics of love really represent? And if I run again, I want to speak to that specifically, because I think one of the reasons why we as a country are having a real problem right now is that we're not speaking policy in a way that resonates. Whatever you think of the current president, when he did simple policy planks, like no tax on tips, I think that's bad policy. I think that people who work in the kitchen washing dishes should have the same tax rate as the people in the front of the house. I think we should have a radically different tax rate for America that rewards work. I can go into that, but that's my democratic speak of speaking a bunch of policy. To find one simple thing to say, like, nobody in America, whether you make $200,000, $100,000, or $50,000, Americans should not pay taxes on their first $70,000 worth of earnings. Something simple like that would give every working person in America a huge increase and keep more of their hard-earned dollars. But it is simple ideas like that that I think we have to balance, the heart and the head, where I know as a voter that this person has me on the real policy stuff, then also their spirit. I believe that the best political leaders I've loved in my life are the ones that get the prose really good. Hillary Clinton had the prose better than any. I truly got to know her when she ran for president and fell in love with her because I'm a nerd policy wonk. And I had never met an elected leader that knew how to deal with housing, that knew the ins and outs of healthcare. But the prose, the poetry of politics, that marrying of the two is what I hope we need leaders like that. And should I ever try it again, the first question I'll ask me is, do I think I can be that kind of leader if I run for president?
Well, for what it's worth, most people have a hard time with the poetry. So if your problem is the prose, that's soluble.
Yeah, but I think it's a problem that is real for all of us in the sense that healthcare is a mess before Donald Trump. Before Donald Trump, the number one reason people declared bankruptcy still is healthcare in America. And so there is this deep ingrained cynicism about the complexities of our time that are making it very hard for us to wrap around a unifying cause to fix that problem. And so I think we as a country are in one of those moments where we need to have the poetry to inspire us to have, as Martin Luther King said, the audacity to believe that every child can have a school that can nurture their genius, food that can nurture their body, and a community that can ignite their spirits, but also know what that looks like in a policy sense. And here's the hope. Let's take a divisive issue, women's right to choose, to do what to do with their own body. I listen as much as I can to conservative thinkers and policy people. When I stood on the Senate floor for 25 hours, I told my team, let's find every conservative think tank that we could use in this speech to show that we do have common values and actually common policy aspirations. And what's exciting to me is I'm studying a lot before I come out in my re-election year next year with what I hope is those policies that back up that politics of love. is what I'm getting encouraged by. As much as all of these corporations and even foreign adversaries want to divide us and tell us the lie of how much we have against us, what I'm seeing even from the right on a lot of their conservative folks is everybody's saying, wait a minute, we've made it this the most difficult industrial nation to raise a family. I'm hearing conservative voices saying, why do we live in a nation where childcare, quality childcare, is more expensive in most of our states than tuition at the state college? Why do we have a nation that says you should have a baby and then 2 weeks later be back at work? Why do we have a nation where most brain development, 85-90%, is done to 0 to 5, and yet we don't have universal preschool? There is chords that in policy that I'm hoping we as a nation can say, wait a minute, we may have some divisions here, but there are some simple, basic things we could do to make things easier for everybody. And the last example I'll give you is the absurdities that we don't talk about. I have a feeling this is going to surprise a lot of you, that over 90% of our agricultural subsidies, think about this for a second, over 90% of the money we all spend that goes to subsidies in agriculture go to the foods that our doctors tell us we shouldn't eat. Only 7% of our ag subsidies goes to fruits and vegetables. It's the reason why my kids are so connected to these farmers right now. It's an extinction level moment for American farmers. My kids, it's the same reason, same connection. They want us to believe that inner city kids in Newark have nothing in common with farmers in rural Iowa. But my kids in Newark go to a corner, we call them bodegas, grocery stores, and a Twinkie product is cheaper than an apple. Our food system is so broken, but yet nobody wants to tell the story of the suffering of the American farmer is directly connected to the fact that 50% of America's population is diabetic or pre-diabetic. And I guess I'm just bringing up this one policy track to tell you that that's what I want from our leaders, is to be able to talk to the common pain that we're all feeling, finding healthy foods that are not saturated in pesticides, that actually nourish the body and are not ultra processed, that be able to tell a story about a yearning that people on the left feel and the people on the right feel, that can unify us around policy that can actually do something that Americans are waiting for. We've been talking about these problems for so long, but my life isn't getting better. In fact, I'm working harder than my grandparents and I'm making less than them, and my children have a bleaker outlook. That's, to me, the combination of policy and the poetry to get people to believe in that sense of we have common pain that we're all feeling, but to translate that again in America to a renewed sense of common cause.
Right.
Will you join me once again in thanking Senator Booker and Canon Meacham?
Thank you.
Brief announcement for you. In several weeks, we'll be having another program, this time with Governor Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania and Governor Spencer Cox from Utah, who will be here talking about how we stand against political violence in our country. So I hope you'll join us for that. I'm going to share a prayer with you at the end here, but please don't leave your seat. Our choir, some members of our choir are going to close us out with a gift this evening. So I'm going to end with a few words from Jesus. Love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. Do good and lend, expecting nothing in return. Be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. Do not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. For the measure you give will be the measure you receive. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit be with us all this night and always. Amen.